What we're really looking at on the money issue is that people with disabilities need some extra funding, and most of them will look to government to provide it for the extra costs that they incur as a result of their disability, and to be clear about it, as a result of living in a society which doesn't cater easily to their needs. So we're having some compensatory payment for those difficulties. So people with disabilities need some money. The issue is, well, how do we distribute it? And I think there are two basic choices. And one is a simple approach where people tick boxes to describe the extent of their disability, and on the basis of whether they meet the requirements or not, they get some funding, which they are then entitled to use however they wish. There is no check-up, no nothing. What we would generally call it would be a welfare benefit payment. They meet the requirements, so they get the money, they do with it what they wish. And that's all very well, except that it's a blunt instrument. It's not a very efficient way to distribute money. Some people, because of their circumstances, will need more, some will need less. So it becomes politically and financially impractical to distribute all the money that people may need due to their disability in that way. But you can provide at least a ground level of compensation for the entirely predictable costs of having a disability. But then the alternative, and this is all that individualized funding really is a system which is more tailored to the individual, their circumstances and their aspirations, and allows them to have more choice about the way in which they spend their money. But with it, and because sometimes it may be many, many thousands of dollars, there will be a requirement to make sure people are spending their money correctly. And that's fair. So there's a trade-off there between low interference in people's lives and entitlement, but not so much money, against a system of funding which has much more capacity to fund people, but comes with the downside of the state inevitably and ultimately quite rightly checking that tax dollars are being used in an appropriate way. So most jurisdictions come down to two ways of doing that. One is the welfare benefit system, and then either a case managed system or individualized funding. That's what it is. There's nothing secret or magical about this. It's about how do we distribute dollars to people with disabilities who need assistance. I have argued very strongly that an individualized funding system needs to be very clear in the roles that it gives the different parties in the process. When we're looking at a system where you've got the state, the government, holding the money and ultimately determining where it will go, you've got people who require that funding, and you've got the providers, or in some cases the individuals who as employees will provide personal assistance, who are delivering the supports that are required. So there's a fundamental issue which individualised funding is really playing with, which is about, well, what's the relationship between those three? And then we do tend to need some other people in place, and probably the most important of those is the individual independent planning support, or as it's come to be known, the support broker role, which can fit in a number of places, but to my mind, and I think there's an increasing recognition of the importance, this must be independent. Independent from the agency, the government that's providing the funding, independent of the providers who are delivering the support, but accountable to the individual who needs assistance with planning. All sorts of weird things go wrong if you start having planners who also have a hand in rationing the money. And there's clearly something wrong in principle with a provider agency being the agency that also determines how somebody's going to spend their money. I don't go to somebody who provides a commercial service to ask them whether they are for their help in how to spend that money, because I would expect them to be biased towards their own services. They may give excellent service, but we shouldn't base a system on the hope that people will always do the right thing. we should recognise that people have their interests that they bring to the system, and they're going to play those out. And we need to harness those interests to make the system work well. So an obvious example would be, let's have a competitive market where providers have to convince the person requiring support that they will provide a good service, and if they don't provide a good service, that the person will go elsewhere. That's how it works for the rest of us in our lives, and I think it's entirely right that providers should be up against their competition. If they want to maximise their profit, grow as an organisation, they will deliver a good service.